My uncle Sergei Cherenkov, who I'm sure doesn't require an introduction, told me, "I'm not a hero." Of course, you've heard him say these things before, followed by a speech about how our fallen soldiers and martyred civilians are the real heroes. But you haven't heard him say it the way he did that day, while idly swirling a vodka glass on the rocks at my kitchen table. Instead of the pretentiousness with which he'd composed himself in that speech, he spoke with a dry wryness that was tinged with something harder. "I'm not at all. Would you like to discuss it?" With uncertainty, I asked him. The retired general laughed sardonically. "I know I shouldn't, but at this point in time the only reason that's happening is to save some stuffy bigwigs, including myself, from getting embarrassed, so what the heck?" I was 47 years old, yet he still called me kiddo. "Sit down, and I'll tell you the true story of the Battle of Berlin." It's unnecessary for me to describe how shocked I was to hear him say these things. The true account of the most hero-worshipped engagement of the entire darn war? Uncle Sergei seemed to be suggesting that there was a conspiracy to conceal the truth about that war, thus discovering that there was one would be similar to discovering that there was a plot to conceal the truth about the War of Berlin. Now, it's a stretch to say that we could have stopped the Berlin invasion, but it's highly likely that we could have taken the intelligence seriously, if only we had taken the fleet that carried the invasion out of the sky, forced the Empire to retreat and turn tail. However, suppose we had taken that action. What do you think would have happened next? Are you recommending... Childo, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just consider what may have occurred if we had taken that action. I paused then, and gave my uncle's hypothetical some serious thinking. Well, I guess their emperor was overthrown for it. Sergei gave a shrug. Maybe, maybe not, unless it was genuinely needless. Even those insane bastards weren't in the habit of toppling a guy for a single misstep. On the other hand, we were not at all concerned about a leadership transition on Fennequel, as his prospective successors were even more eager to oppose us than he was. Not at all. Instead, they would have licked their wounds, sought to track down and destroy anyone who had leaked their invasion plans to us, paused to reconsider their course of action and reassemble their forces, and then returned later with an even larger invasion force, as well as a clearer understanding of our capabilities, with no assurance that we would be aware of its location or timing, which, believe me, would have been awful. Really, really awful. But we were certain that we would have them beat if they were able to reach landfall, although it seems foolish to us, from a military standpoint, that they maintained sending wave after wave of fleets to their deaths against our defenses was unavoidable, considering the political predicament their emperor was in. He could not afford to lose the ground he had gained, and even worse, to leave an entire marine field army to perish. Although it goes against every military man's belief system, leaving troops behind is naturally disliked, but in their hyper-macho culture, it was practically a religious mandate. Thou shalt not leave a man behind. As he related this portion of the event, Sergei became more excited and even smiled. It was understandable why, as nothing could cheer up a military man more than seeing the adversary commit catastrophic error after catastrophic error. He went on. This means that he would have been usurped, imprisoned, and possibly put to death if he had followed the wise, moral, and potentially deadly course of action that would have saved his empire. I'm sure he knew all along what he should have been doing, so it should come as no surprise that he fought like such an unyielding moron, and it was completely expected in advance that he would as well. I concluded, "So you are saying that we intentionally allowed the invasion to occur?" Once again sober, my uncle said, "That we did, kiddo. But naturally, we were unable to acknowledge that the Earth Alliance required unity more than ever. If people had known that we had purposefully sacrificed Berlin, it would not have achieved that goal. Therefore, we concocted this ridiculous narrative in which a brave man speaks out as the only dissenting voice in the High Council, the only one who takes the threat of invasion seriously, and organizes the defenses of Berlin. The last line was said with the mocking tone of a movie trailer anew. I was picked to be the hero of the hour because I really had the power to do that on my own recognizance, though I'm sure I would have been court-martialed for it if I had really been going off the reservation at the time I was doing all that, Sergei said, continuing his account. Let's pretend that my instincts as a former Special Forces soldier and FSB agent let me see what the rest of the High Council missed and all that nonsense, and I'm sure my background helped. And really, with all that, what could I possibly say? I see, I muttered. Naturally, it didn't end there. We had to draw things out as long as we could because, you see, the enemy would only act like fools for as long as they had hope of freeing their captive invasion force. And I'll tell you what, sitting there with the men I had taken an oath to lead professionally and purposefully failing to accomplish our stated aim while putting them in risk made me feel like a true rat bastard. However, each time one of their fleets plunged headfirst into our system defense's meat grinder, I was constantly reminded that it was all worthwhile. Without even setting foot on our territory, entire brigades of their finest space marines perished. Furthermore, we were able to quickly analyze and reverse engineer their technology thanks to the hundreds of their ships that we were seizing, all of which were in extremely poor condition. And for that reason alone, we were able to reverse the situation and launch an offensive in the war. The only reason our victory was possible was because they were completely worn out, and we had managed to stay relatively fresh while attempting to catch up to them technologically. I'd like to see that happen if they hadn't been acting like a bunch of blithering idiots for 2/3 of the war. By all previous records, both on Earth and in the greater sector, you know. It was their worst, against our greatest, of course, but it was scarcely much of a numerical advantage at all, given the gap between our pre-war forces. Hold on, I said, suddenly realizing. Is it the reason you never seem to be able to obtain additional help? Yes, my uncle replied. To be honest, there are moments when I'm shocked that the cover story for all that held together. Our entire war effort would have failed if we had been so crippled by incompetence and the kind of small-minded bureaucrats who could not forgive me for the sin of being right when they were wrong. But somehow, it all came together. Unfortunately for me, all of that just served to solidify my legend. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not ashamed of this in the slightest. There is no place for someone in the military who cannot handle having blood on their hands. The art of war literally consists of the systematic killing of people for political purposes. The majority of individuals aren't honored for their acts of bastardry or for the most brutal thing they have ever done in their lives, even though this wasn't the most callous thing we did during the war. He let out a sigh. I absolutely detest the obeisance individuals show me when I'm out in public, and I promise to God that I will come clean in public if they do grant me that fucking holiday.